All right, now that you've developed your logo idea, let's walk it through Illustrator so that we can make the vector lines necessary to make a slightly more complex shape actually cuttable on the vinyl cutter. Just like before, open up Creative Cloud, choose Apps, and this time install or open, if you've got it already, Adobe Illustrator. So go ahead and make a new file, and let's make it a square. Here I'm making mine 3 inches by 3 inches. It doesn't really matter how big the square is. What matters more for us is just that it's a square instead of a rectangle. And then go to File, Place. We're going to place our drawing into Illustrator, and then we're going to make vector lines on top of it. So File, Place, find your drawing, and then click on your artboard. And mine came in huge, so I'm going to place the upper left corner in the upper left corner of my artboard. And then I'm going to drag the bottom right corner until it snaps onto the bottom right corner of my artboard. And because everything is a square, I can have confidence that I haven't accidentally distorted anything that I've drawn. And having gotten it where I want it, I don't want to be able to accidentally drag it off to the side. So I'm going to come over to my Layers tab and click this box to set the lock icon on my drawing, locking it in place, preventing any changes. And then I'm going to choose the pen tool, and I'm going to proceed very carefully to set some anchor points. I'm going to start up here in the top left corner, and I'm going to click once. Just once, because a single click creates a sharp cornered anchor point. And then I'm going to move my mouse down, and as I do, I'm going to hold the Shift key, because that's going to lock my descent into a 45 or a 90-degree angle. And then when I get to the bottom left, I'm going to click just once again because I want another sharp corner. And then I'm going to move my mouse to the right, holding the Shift key to preserve that 90-degree angle until I get to this spot here where I believe that the flat of my D starts to round up into the curve of the D. And when I get there, I'm going to click, again just once, because I want a sharp corner here. I'm going to make the curve in a minute. And then I'm going to find the spot on my curve where I think it changes direction. And to me, a change in direction is like a local maximum. It starts to curve back in on itself. And there, I'm not just going to click once. I'm going to click and drag, because clicking and dragging starts to create a curve. Not only does it set an anchor point, but it sets an anchor point with 2 Bezier handles. And the further out I drag, the more curvaceous this curve is going to become. And the more straight up and down the Bezier handles, the more balanced this half of the curve is going to be with the other half. And as I consider all those elements, eventually I find a spot and go, here, this is the curve that I want. Then it's just a simple matter of clicking once when the curve becomes the flat at the top, and clicking again when I snap to my initial anchor point, creating now a closed vector line. Okay, next I'm going to make sure that this vector is still selected, and then I'm going to go to the Properties tab, which only shows me the properties of what I have selected. And I'm going to make the stroke of this vector non-existent, this little slash, and I'm going to make the fill blue so that I can differentiate it from the hand drawing underneath. And then I'm going to make this rectangular white highlight by switching to my rectangle tool, drawing the rectangle and giving it no stroke and a white fill. And along the way, I'm working with my Layers tab in the following way. I'm thinking about the stack of layers and making sure that the items that I want to see are on the top of the stack, downward to my hand drawing. And I'm turning on and off the visibility icons, these eyeballs, as needed so that I can see what I need to see in the moment. Okay, now the cutouts. These are a little tricky. They start simply enough. I'm going to click and hold on my rectangle tool until I open up the panel so that I can pick the ellipse tool. And then I'm going to click and drag, and as I drag, I'm going to hold down the Shift key to lock this ellipse to be a perfect circle. And as best as I can, I'm going to place the circle in the center of my hand-drawn cutout, one on the top and another on the bottom. And I'm going to give them no stroke and a white fill, and I'm going to make sure that they sit on the top of my layer stack so that they seem to be little cutouts on the backside of my blade. And then I'm going to drag them around using these handy pink alignment lines that pop up to help me snap to other elements so that I can line them up vertically on my big curve in a pleasing way. And then I'm going to select both of them by clicking on one, holding Shift, and clicking on the other. And then I'm going to go to the Object Transform Each tool so that I can play with the size of these circles and watch them both change size at the same time. This helps me decide on a size that feels right. Good. And now some really important cleanup. This might look like a razor blade with some cutouts in the big curve, but those are not cutouts. They're just circles placed on top of a big shape that seem to be cutouts. Now let's make them actual cutouts, because if I drove this through the vinyl cutter at this point, I would cut the entire circle. I would cut the entire big curve. I wouldn't follow the actual visual outline of my shape. To make the cutouts real, we need to add some additional anchor points. So click on this dot 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 at the bottom of the toolbar to show all the other tools that Illustrator has hidden away, and drag this pen tool with a plus sign, the add anchor point tool, onto your toolbar so we can use that one. And then with your circle selected, come to the exact intersection between the circle and the big curve and click to add an anchor point on both intersections. Then use these handy little selection buttons to select the big curve, the D shape, and do the same thing. Add an anchor point at both intersections. And on this big curve, you're going to add one more anchor point in between, hovering in the middle of the cutout. And then you're going to switch to your direct selection tool to select an individual anchor point, and you're going to click on that anchor point in the middle so that it is the only anchor point selected. Then just hit the delete key, and you will have turned your closed path into an open path. And then just do the same thing with the circle, with the only difference being that you've got 2 anchor points to delete. Same thing at the bottom. The only difference here is that as I delete more and more anchor points, my fill starts to look weird. That's okay, we're gonna join everything back together in a moment. And it's not a terrible idea to just turn off the fill for all of your shapes for now, because it makes it crystal clear that as we make these deletions, we now are left with 4 open paths. The 2 hemicircles, the arc of the D, and the body of the D. With these 4 open paths, we are perfectly positioned to use Illustrator's Object Path Join tool. And notice how when I execute it, Illustrator takes these 4 selected, pretty simple paths and joins them together into one complex path. And this complex path is closed, so I can easily fill it with black and then drag my rectangle to be on top of it in the layer stack. All right, at this point you should be ready to cut it on the vinyl cutter just like the warm-up exercise, with the only difference being that it's your project now, and the size might be a little bit different. There might be a little bit of an adventure ahead, but that's the adventure of the physical vinyl cutting process itself. And really the only thing you've got to decide here is the size of your project. So scale your project to be somewhere 3 inches by 3, 4 inches by 4. Don't go too big too soon as you're still figuring out all these details. And then cut your actual physical piece of vinyl. You're going to want to make sure that you leave extra room for the roller wheels, because you can't cut all the way to the edge. You've got to have something to hang on to. You should be able to figure that out. Good luck.